Hey, welcome to another edition of the College 12-Pack. I'm your host, Patrick Conn, Senior Editor of the College Wires. With me, as always, Tyler Nettuno of LSU Tigers Wire. We're talking about Week 0 in college football. Man, this slate is weaker than a Jim Harbaugh suspension, let me tell you. And that's actually funny that I say that, right, Tyler, because that's where we're going to start. Jim Harbaugh suspension, the NCAA. Jim Harbaugh agreed on a suspension. So we thought of 4 games, only to find out the NCAA was going to throw it out. And then the school, hoping to mitigate some pressure, I'm guessing, on the NCAA to do something, suspend him for the first 3 games. So he's not going to miss a single game that actually matters. When you hear this, I mean, is that the sense you're getting? Is they're hoping to mitigate some of the punishment that's going to be coming down the road, or is this simply going to blow up in their face?
I mean, that's certainly the logic behind it, right? They're trying to get out ahead of this, and we've seen this kind of thing happen before. And, there's a pretty decent track record historically for being able to mitigate penalties from the NCAA by self-imposing. Usually that takes a postseason ban, though. Usually I feel like that takes a self-imposed bowl ban. This one's kind of strange, though, because, I mean, like you said, seemingly had a deal with the NCAA to accept his 4-game suspension when the NCAA backed off that, looking like, seemingly implying they're going to come down harder. I don't really know why they would then accept this 3-game suspension that, not that the initial 4 games was anything too severe, but it did at least, cause him to miss a Big Ten game. Now he's not going to miss anything at all of any significance. I mean, it's surprising to say the least, I think it's kind of just going to, be a cloud coming over the season, because I think we all kind of are expecting that something's going to happen after the fact. He's going to have to face a disciplinary board, and there's a decent chance that, they'll probably end up doing stricter punishments than what Michigan's self-imposing here. So, I mean, it's just kind of weird. Part of me is a little surprised they would even try to add to that cloud by suspending Harbaugh, when it seems in all likelihood more is probably going to end up happening in the long run.
And if you've been under a rock and you don't know what we're referring to, we're talking about the level 2, level 1 violations by Michigan during the COVID years, essentially, when face-to-face was not supposed to be happening. And then obviously the big level 1 violations we're talking about is misleading, NCAA investigators, which I just feel like a 3-game suspension, specifically given who they're playing, really speaks to how this is nothing more than a slap on the wrist. And I think the NCAA is probably going to take a harsher stance to this later in the season, and we will get there. We'll talk about this more, as details come out, but as of now, it's just a pretty weak look when you look at everything involved in what's going on with the Michigan program. Jim Harbaugh, and again, like I've said in previous episodes, this feels like a harsher suspension is going to come, and then Jim Harbaugh is going to entertain the NFL once again, kind of a la Pete Carroll. But what I do think is interesting, and we're going to get back to the stuff on the Build the Football stuff. Now, BetMGM has recently updated their Heisman odds heading into the season. This struck me a little bit. I didn't see this coming. Second best odds, Jaden Daniels, quarterback at LSU, coming in right behind Caleb Williams. And then you go and you look, number 3, Quinn Ewers at Texas. Now, we've talked about Texas at length. I would be hard-pressed to say that Quinn Ewers shouldn't get some preseason love. However, a guy who really stood out last year, Drake May of North Carolina, coming in at number 10. Were there any other takeaways you had from these preseason Heisman odds from BetMGM that were just released days ago?
Yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of the big ones there, right? I mean, so starting with the top 2, not really surprising to see Caleb Williams leading off the board. And obviously hard to repeat as Heisman winner. We don't exactly see Heisman winners return to school super often. But I think Bryce Young, thinking of another one that just did that. Caleb Williams has a really good chance to do that this year, I think. If he stays healthy and plays in every game, we've seen what he can do. I mean, this is a really prolific offense. He runs it really well. I don't really see any reason he's going to slow down statistically this year. So I think he's a pretty safe bet to potentially be the second ever to win it twice. But yeah, obviously the big story here is Jaden Daniels, big riser all the way up to number 2. A guy who came in from Arizona State last year, I don't think with particularly high expectations because it had kind of soured there towards the end. Had a hot start as a true freshman and kind of regressed a little bit from that point forward. But he really had a great year. All year was able to make plays with his legs. Had the most prolific rushing season an LSU quarterback's ever had. And he really developed as a downfield passer too, as the season sort of went on, really improved in kind of seeing the field and his decision-making. So I think this makes sense to me. I mean, I've got questions about Jaden Daniels, but he's going to have a really productive season, especially if he stays healthy and is able to run the ball the way he did last year. So I can see that. I'm with you. The two I think that were a little high were both Quinn Ewers at 3 was surprising to me, and then also Cade Klubnik at 5. I think both of those guys, obviously have a lot of talent. No denying that. Former 5 stars. In Ewers' case, he was the number 1 overall prospect. But, we haven't seen a lot of Klubnik. He only played sort of in the last couple games last year. And, Ewers battled injuries, had some up and down play last year. I'm a little surprised to see those guys. And then especially with a guy like Drake May being down so low. I mean, Drake May's got the same Heisman odds as Carson Beck at Georgia, who's never started a game before.
One guy that I think if you were going to elevate him, Marvin Harrison Jr., who's the highest non-quarterback on this list, but even he's a little bit low for me. I mean, just go back and look what he did against Georgia, the best talent on the field, and they could not stop it. And so for me, raise him up. I think he was a little more deserving to be higher. There's a lot of projecting going on here, and obviously these odds are going to change from week to week. But as of right now, as we're looking at the preseason, as week 0 is getting to kick off, I was a little shocked by those. But in terms of talking about week 0, Tyler, we're talking about we got Navy versus Notre Dame in Ireland. That's kind of the kickoff to our season. I'm excited about this game for a couple of reasons. Obviously, Navy has a new head coach, so you almost want to know how is this going to look. After being led by Ken Alphabet Soup, I'm not even going to butcher his name or even try to. He had been there for so long, and now it's a completely different look. How do they look? But another big question for me is Sam Hartman. He's a guy who's one of the top quarterbacks in the country, goes to Notre Dame, only to lose his offensive coordinator to Alabama. So Tommy Rees is running that program, running the offense, I should say. So looking at them, there's a lot of questions between both of these teams. But I do like the fact that the Fighting Irish are starting off the season in Ireland. So that excites me a little bit. But outside of that, I don't feel like this is going to be relatively close. I think the Fighting Irish are going to, throttle them, essentially. So how are you looking at this game? And is there any storylines that we should be paying attention to as we watch this game, as we kick off another college football season?
Yeah, I mostly agree with what you're saying. I think Notre Dame is pretty, overmatched here over Navy. I think, I'd be pretty concerned if this were not a pretty decisive win. Looking at Navy, like you said, pushed out Ken Niumatalolo. He had been there a long time. Was pretty surprising to see that happen. In all honesty, they promote from within with defensive coordinator Brian Newberry. And, Brian Newberry, option guy through and through. He had been at Navy for the last couple of years as defensive coordinator. Prior to that, was in the same role at Kennesaw State, an FCS team that moving up to FBS next year, but they run the triple option too. So, pretty immersed in that tree. Not going to see a change here, which is interesting because their, Service Academy counterpart Army is making a change. Recent rule change from last year, it affected the way teams can block downfield, and that really limits your ability to run the triple option successfully. Army's pivoting away from it. Navy is not, though. So we will see, a pretty traditional Navy look in this game. And, I don't really expect that to be too challenging for Notre Dame. I think you really hit the nail on the head with Sam Hartman. That's the main thing I'm watching in this game is just how does he adjust to, a new offensive system where he's going to be asked to do more. And also just a new offensive system overall for this team because Tommy Rees left for Alabama, obviously.
Yeah, that's essentially what it boils down to. And like we said, it's interesting for that point alone, those 2 points alone. But as far as a competitive game, I'm not expecting much. Maybe a little more competitive would be the next game that we're going to talk about. We got the Trojan War. We have the Spartans and the Trojans, USC, San Jose State. Unfortunately, people like me and you aren't going to be able to watch the game. considering it's on the Pac-12 network, and nobody really carries that network. However, what I will be interesting to kind of see as the follow-up, the offense is not a question, right? I think we both can agree. The offense is not a question. Defensively, it's going to be a lot of new faces on the defensive side of the ball. I'm pretty sure the front four are all transfers in. When you talk about Anthony Lucas, who comes over from Texas A&M. You have Jamil Muhammad. You have Mason Cobb, who comes over, I believe, from Oklahoma State. They've got guys up and down this roster that are new. And you hope that that's just going to be enough for a team that really struggled to stop anybody last year defensively.
Yeah, this is a game. I'm not saying it's going to be a good game. I'm just saying it's one that I'm going to sort of be keeping an eye on. For a few reasons. I mean, first of all, Caleb Williams hasn't played football since either December or January. I can't remember when that game was, but point being, end of the year in pretty disappointing fashion. I'm sure he's excited to get back out on the field, taking on a G5 team. This could be a really big game for him and just could be fun to watch if you're, one of the people that's able to watch it. But and then looking at San Jose State on the other side, not a great Group of 5 team, but a solid one. They've got a really good quarterback in Chevin Cordero. He's a Hawaii transfer, sort of one of the guys that left when all that blew up under Todd Graham. He's a good player, landed there last year. So this is a good offense. Like we've said, we have a lot of questions about this USC defense. Could this get into shootout territory and maybe be something to watch? Maybe. I would say if you have a way to watch this game, maybe keep an eye on it.
Yes, and talking about Hawaii, they're also got a big game in week 0. Last year, Vanderbilt traveled to Hawaii. This year, Hawaii's coming to Nashville to take on the Commodores. And it's really going to be interesting because I want to see how Timmy Chang's offense and how his team performs in this coming season. Obviously, it wasn't great last year. And, it was a great start for Vanderbilt. I want to see if Vanderbilt can kind of build on that under Clark Lee. Now, I'm not going to say that Clark Lee is under any pressure to win, but you do want to see that progression. And with what he was able to do last year, I think this year it's all about, can Vanderbilt finally get back to a bowl game, somewhere they haven't been since Franklin left. James Franklin left the team to take over Penn State.
Yeah, I think when you look at this game against Hawaii, I think it really is just a game where they need to make a statement. They won this game at Hawaii last year, pretty comfortably. It wasn't too difficult. And that was when they were not playing their best football at the beginning of last year. They sort of, peaked near the end, as we saw with their wins over Kentucky and Florida. And I think, like I said, this is just a Hawaii team that, going back to, the way it all ended with Todd Graham, this team is in a long, long rebuild. I mean, like year -1 still probably for Timmy Chang. So, there's no reason this should be a competitive game on paper. Vandy's got him at home. I think they need to show something. I think we're excited, at least cautiously optimistic about what AJ Swan brings to the table. Secured that starting quarterback job last year and really looked good down the stretch. He's kind of got the full-time job now. This could be a good team. I think like you said, I think a bowl game should be the goal here. And it starts with beating a pretty bad Hawaii team comfortably.
It does start there, and I do expect that's what's going to happen. And we'll get a lot of answers as far as how comfortable or how competitive, I should say, not comfortable, how competitive are they going to be this year when we're talking about the Vanderbilt Commodores, who kind of have been the laughingstock of the SEC over the last decade plus, especially on the football side. In talking about, coaches who need to kind of step up. I know you recently wrote something on For the Win on your head coaches that need to win. And there's coaches on that list like Jeff Hafley at Boston College, Dino Babers out of Syracuse. But the guy that I want to talk about as we kick off our hot seat discussion, and this might shock some people that you put this guy on your list, but we're looking at Brent Venables at Oklahoma. And really, when you look at, and he's a guy that I've also mentioned under the hot seat for me, a guy that takes over a program who, all intents and purposes, it seemed like they were still poised to compete. And obviously losing to Texas 49-0 didn't sit well with them. But it was historically bad defense for a guy who's known for defense. And that's why I look at them and go, you definitely are on the hot seat for me, because they cannot limp into the SEC next year. under Brent Venables.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams or a lot of coaches, I should say, that were hired last cycle that did not have good year ones at all. Billy Napier at Florida, Mario Cristobal at Miami, who we'll get into in a second. But, Brent Venables, to me, is the guy who we didn't expect that. I don't think any of us really thought that they would have the kind of year one that they did. That was a talented roster. Obviously had lost a lot, with the guys that Lincoln took with him, namely Caleb Williams. But, I don't think they should have been as bad as they were. And in fairness to Brent Venables, it could have easily been a lot better than it was. They lost 4 games by 3 points. So, this could have easily, been a record that looked more like 9-3 or something like that. And if that were the case, I don't think that we're even having this conversation at all. But when they played the best teams in the league, they were way overmatched. 55-24 loss to TCU, obviously the 49-0 embarrassment against Texas. This defense could not hang against the best teams in the conference. And when Dillon Gabriel got hurt, it just couldn't maintain the success it was having. So first of all, Gabriel needs to stay healthy. This team really can't afford injuries there again. And this defense needs to take a step forward, because if it doesn't, like I said, I think this is a candidate. This team could pretty easily take a step forward this year. But, in fairness to Brent Venables, the team, could have pretty easily had a better finish last year, right? They lost 4 games by 3 points. So, could have easily kind of gotten more to like that 9-3, 8-4 sort of range. And that, we wouldn't be talking about this. But, against the best teams in the conference, they were really overmatched, especially defensively. TCU wins 55-24, obviously embarrassing 49-0 loss to Texas. They've got to improve on that side of the ball, because when Dillon Gabriel had injury problems last year, they really were just not able to keep up. So he needs to stay healthy. They have to take a step forward on defense. Venables is considered one of the sport's brightest defensive minds. If he can't get that side of the ball figured out, it's going to be problems. And this is an Oklahoma team that's really not accustomed to not having anything short of a lot of success. They win 10 games almost every single year. Going 6-7 in year one, that's not a good sign. And he needs to get that trajectory turned around fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm going to shout out my Red Raiders, who dropped 51 on them in their final matchup of the season prior to the bowl game. But yeah, you really 6-7 is not going to work. They're going to need to fix that. They're going to need to fix that in a hurry. So that's why we're talking about Brent Venables on the hot seat. But staying in the Big 12, there's another name that's really got to be watching his back this year. We're talking about Neil Brown at West Virginia, a guy that's known for offensive football, but yet their offense is one of the worst in the Big 12 if you look at them statistically. Where do you start with Neil Brown, the Mountaineers, and really they've really not had any kind of sustained success outside of the COVID year when they went 6-4.
Yeah, just to put it bluntly, I think that Neil Brown is probably on the hottest seat, certainly in the Power 5, maybe in the entire country. Like you said, it just really hasn't worked out. He won 31 games in his last 3 seasons at Troy. So it's not like this guy doesn't know how to be successful, but it just really is not translated to West Virginia and the Power 5 at all. West Virginia has kind of struggled since joining the Big 12, like nothing too insane. But, Dan Holgorsen, managed a couple 8-win seasons, won 10 games. They're accustomed to doing a little bit more than Neil Brown has done. He's never won more than 6 games. His best year came COVID year in 2020 when he went 6-4, still went 500 in the Big 12. Like, there's just nothing too impressive here. And I think last year they went in with some hype because you bring in JT Daniels, a former big time recruit, played at USC in Georgia. That really just didn't work out at all. He had basically been benched by the end of the year. Truthfully, I would say they need to figure it out, but I honestly think the only reason Neil Brown is still there is because that buyout was a little too high last year. It was like $17 million, around that range. It's going down by about $7 million this year. And truthfully, if they're not if they don't have a shockingly good season, I have a hard time believing they don't bite the bullet on that buyout.
I will honestly be surprised if Neil Brown gets past week 5 this season in the Big 12, especially with how they're starting out the year. They're playing Penn State, they're playing Pitt in the backyard brawl. It is going to be a tough start for the West Virginia Mountaineers and Neil Brown heading into this season. All right, so let's go to the SEC. Jimbo Fisher is a name that everybody likes to talk about. Whether you talk about some of the crazy antics, I'm gonna call a press conference to call out Nick Saban. I'm gonna go after my fellow SEC brothers, or the fact of who he brought in to run his offense. which was shocking to me to hear that he was going to come run the offense. I feel like the only thing saving Jimbo Fisher is his buyout. You wanted to talk about the buyout of West Virginia. The Texas A&M buyout is insane. And congrats to him and his agent for working that deal out, because that's job security. But eventually, you feel like the oil money that's down there in College Station, eventually they're going to get tired and they're going to drum up enough money to get Jimbo Fisher out of there.
Yeah, the Neil Brown buyout looks like, pennies you find in the couch cushions compared to what they're going to owe Jimbo if they move on from him. So yeah, I mean, let's not bury the lead here. Dude is under a fully guaranteed contract through 2031. If you fire him before the end of this year, you owe him $77 million, which is just an amount of money that I can practically not even fathom. And with that in mind, and I say this in the piece, I think that it would really take, I mean, if there's any signs of improvement here this fall, I think he sticks around because of that buyout number. If you get back to 8-5 range, that's, I mean, maybe not ideal, but I think that's the kind of progress they're looking to see this year. But if you miss a bowl game again, I mean, look, because they, a lot was made about all the losses that A&M had in the transfer portal, which they did have a lot, but they really didn't lose a lot of like their key, young core guys. Connor Wegman, Evan Stewart, that connection's back, should be really good. Defensively, they, Walter Nolan, the best recruit they got in last year's class, he didn't leave, defensive tackle. He's coming back. So, they've got a lot of pieces. I think we expect that they'll take a step forward, but, like you said, this is a school and a booster group with a lot of money. And you gotta wonder that there's going to come a point where they'll just not be tolerating it anymore.
Enough is enough. It makes you wonder, are they ever going to put a year on that blank title that they handed Jimbo Fisher when they hired him? Doesn't look good right now, and we'll see kind of how it all plays out. But this has got to be the year that they show something, especially with all the attention going to be on Jimbo Fisher in College Station in the year prior to Texas joining. I will say this: I am looking forward to Texas A&M annual matchup getting back on the schedule. That was one of my favorite games to watch as somebody who didn't have a dog in the fight. But when we're talking about former Nick Saban assistants, we got to bring up Mario Cristobal in Miami. Year one wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't terrible. But with all the money that they talk about pouring into the program, it didn't seem like the results were there. And now people are starting to have questions. Can Cristobal turn it around in year two?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, definitely could have been a worse year one, but not really by that much of a stretch. I mean, it was pretty bad. Going back to kind of the same thing we talked about with Brett Venables, like it's hard to get fired from a job in year two. We saw Brian Harsin do it, and that took, both feudal on-field performance and off the field issues too. Like there was just a lot going on there. It's hard for that to happen, but man, this first 18 months or so of Mario Cristobal has just not panned out how he sold it. I for one thought that this was the right hire. I thought they were, you're bringing in an alumni, a guy who knows the region, can recruit, can fundraise. I really thought it was going to work out well. Bad year one, early recruiting returns. They got a top 10 class in 2023. They're down to 15 now in 2024. And, they've got 21 guys committed. So it's not like they're, going to fill out a lot more. The early recruiting returns have just kind of dipped. I don't love the trajectory here. Last year on the field was pretty bad. You lose to an A&M team that misses a bowl game. You lose a really ugly game at home to Middle Tennessee State. I mean, there were some embarrassing moments in this campaign. They portaled, they'll get better, but, also replacing both coordinators, I think that it's going to be tough. Josh Gaddis heading to Maryland, obviously Kevin Steele going to Alabama. It's going to be a new look, and Mario had to change things up. Tough look after year one.
It is a tough look for year one, or after year one as we're heading into year two. But there's still time, and there's still opportunity there for Mario Cristobal to get the Hurricanes back, back where they need to be. Perhaps it could be a season like what Florida State just had, And we're going to talk more about Florida State in just a moment. But Norvell was a guy that people wanted to run out of town, but now it looks like he might be there to stay for a while. As we continue to preview of the 2023 college football season, I want to get into a little bit of buy or sell. And who we're going to buy or sell are the Alabama Crimson Tide. There's been a lot of change with Alabama. They lost a good amount of players. Bryce Young is one of the big ones that is now gone. Will Anderson is another. But everybody wants to know, is Alabama going to regain the throne? Are they going to take that back from Kirby Smart, from Brian Kelly, the two coaches that faced off in the SEC title game? So where do you lean, Tyler? Are you buying or selling the Crimson Tide in 2023?
Yeah, I'm selling. I think this is really, honestly, to me, shaping up to be the closest thing that you get at Alabama to a transition year. Obviously they're talented. They're always talented. They've got a roster loaded with 5 stars, but the quarterback, I think the quarterback situation is a real concern, more so than it's been in a while when Alabama's had to make, had a starting quarterback move on. We saw Jalen Milroe last year. I don't think he really was particularly impressive. And then we haven't seen much of Ty Simpson, but the fact that neither was able to sort of separate themselves in the spring, obviously Alabama brings in Tyler Buckner from Notre Dame. He's also not really a guy that moves the needle for me much. I mean, I kind of feel like he was brought in more as an insurance option. If one of those 2 guys they already got isn't the guy. I just don't love it. They lose guys on defense too. Will Anderson. And last year, I don't think Alabama really had the playmakers on offense that it had the last couple of years before that, but it loses the best one it had in Jahmyr Gibbs, who's off to the NFL. It's just going to be a big transition year for Alabama. New coordinators, new scheme, and you got an LSU team that looks pretty complete in the SEC West and beat you last year. You got them in Tuscaloosa this time around, but I mean, in terms of competing for the playoff and winning the SEC West, I'm selling Alabama.
It's hard to go against that logic, but the only caveat for me is it is Nick Saban, so it's kind of hard to go against Nick Saban. But I think that you make a lot of valid points because a trio of Jermaine Burton, Ja'Cory Brooks, Kobe Prentice doesn't exactly strike fear into teams, especially given how they performed a year ago. And we'll kind of see with that. I think the LSU matchup really is going to tell us a lot. And I think that they might have more trouble with Auburn this year, with Hugh Freeze kind of taking over that program. And they look improved. I'm not going to say that Auburn is now the team to beat in Alabama. I wouldn't go that far. But I do think they're going to be a little tougher out than they have been the last couple of years with Brian Harsin running the program. And then obviously they went with an interim head coach for that matchup last year. I'm on the fence on this one. But for argument's sake, I'm going to say I'm going to buy just because of one thing. It's still Nick Saban. All right, so let's get into our next buy or sell. Tyler, you have the floor. USC Trojans, are you buying or selling?
I'm also selling here. I'm not down on USC. I just think that this is going to be a really similar season to what USC had last year. And what we saw last year was a really good team that was a step behind not only the teams that made the playoffs, but even the best team in its own conference in Utah. I mean, look, I've talked about him already, so I won't repeat myself too much, but Caleb Williams is a stud. I mean, that guy's fantastic. Still got a lot of questions about this Alex Grinch defense. They're, I think, more talented teams in this conference than them. How are they going to take down Utah, a team that they played twice last year? And, first game was closer than the second game, but I think both times, I think it was pretty clear that Utah was the more physical, more competent team. I mean, they've got quarterback, injury issues this year. Maybe that'll help USC. I just am not really buying. I think they're going to probably drop a couple games and maybe be in the New Year's 6 range, but not really much else.
Normally, I would try to go against you, but I am also selling here when it comes to the USC Trojans for the reasons that you just talked about. Oh, but let's not forget the Pac-12 is full of quarterbacks on the top tier level. Michael Penix Jr. at Washington, Bo Nix at Oregon, who's returning. There's a lot of quarterbacks here. We haven't even talked about Jaden DeLauria. The Pac-12 is full of quarterbacks. And honestly, I don't trust that defense. That's my big thing. Lincoln Riley, if I had to say you got to go, final drive of the game, okay, yes. I will buy in on that. But if Alex Grinch has got to make a key stop in the fourth quarter, I'm selling on that defense. So I'm going to go with you on that one. This one I am buying on as we get into our final buy or sell. Florida State, I'm going to buy what Mike Norvell is doing down in Tallahassee. I think he's doing a fantastic job. And you look at who he brought in. He has Johnny Wilson already, along with Jordan Travis and Trey Benson. Keon Coleman from Michigan State comes in, a guy who is highly touted. He's going to come down there. Oh, and they got Jaheim Bell from South Carolina, who's your tight end / running back, kind of do a little bit of everything for you. You look at the offense, it's stocked. And then on the defensive side, you got to try and slow down Jared Burst. All I'm going to say is ACC, good luck.
Yeah, I'd love to play devil's advocate here and say I'm selling for the sake of argument, but like you for USC, I just can't do that. I'm really high on this Florida State team. A team that I think on paper is probably the most talented team in the ACC. And for that reason, this is a really important year for Mike Norvell. Last season, he really flipped the script. No one really thought they were going to have the year they had. He had a tough, 2020 and 2021. He changed that conversation a lot, but if they disappoint this year, it can easily revert back because there's really no reason for them to disappoint this year. Like you said, offensively, they're loaded. Jordan Travis, experienced guy, he started a lot of games, can run the ball, can throw the ball, good running back, and Trey Benson. On the defensive side of the ball, bringing back Verse, he was one of the best defensive players in the entire country last year. Maybe would have been a first-round pick. Instead, he's back and could be, maybe even like a first overall pick kind of guy this year. And then on top of that, just to kind of illustrate how well that Mike Norvell's portaled here over the last couple of years, they got two of the best portal players in the entire country on defense this past offseason. Fentrell Cypress, a corner from Virginia, Braden Fisk, a defensive lineman from Western Michigan. Those are going to be impact players too. I mean, it's a bold strategy, the way that Norvell's gone about using the portal, but now the high school recruiting is also starting to pick up. I like their trajectory here. I think, you look at Clemson, they're good. They're going to be, kind of another good Clemson year, but questions, we'll see what Klubnik does. If someone's going to make that claim, this year, knock Clemson off, become the top team in the conference, I think Florida State is easily the team to do it. I mean, they're the most talented non-Clemson team in the conference and might be the most talented team overall by a pretty wide margin.
And let's not forget, Clemson and Florida State are going to meet early in the season, so we're going to find out real quick.
And they could play again, too, because no divisions.
Absolutely. Could be a no division. We're not guaranteed a North Carolina Clemson. It could be Florida State versus Clemson for the second time. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. We're going to be back next week as we recap the games of Week 0, get you ready for Week 1. But for Tyler, I'm Patrick. We'll see you next week.